when you're autistic, it's like times 1,000. So travel means so many things. And there are
Mhm.
like times where it's super easy for me. It's easier than regular life. And then times when like it's really hard. So
You know,
at a really
um,
high level, autistic brains
yeah.
process on average 42% more information. And
Hmm.
everything's a sliding scale in the world. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, but just as an average number. So if you remember when we were growing up, you would always hear like humans only use 7% of their brain.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
statistic has been debunked, but
Hmm.
it never sat right with me. Like I always wanted to dig into that statistic. And that
Yeah.
is very, very not true for and all neurodivergent people, but especially autistic people. So the way it works, when you're born, everybody has uh, the same amount of synapses.
Mhm.
What makes someone autistic, what autism is a resistance to mTOR protein. So we have a
Mm.
lack of mTOR protein, so we have less synaptical pruning. And it's just passed on through hereditary. It's just like brown eyes, like it's
Mm.
misphonia, like hearing people chew, or oh my God, on planes, people unwrapping packets.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
please don't unwrap things. Like, you're going to have to not unwrap things. Like, that is an area for me where I particularly have, you asked about superpowers. I have
Mhm.
supersonic hearing. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
That's
Um,
interesting.
so I have something called aphantasia. My brain doesn't, I cannot close my eyes and picture a damn thing. I can't see a road and
Mm.
imagine like
Mm.
the layout of a city or something.
Mhm.
Mm.
No ability to visualize anything. And so there are places where I need supports, like
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
my sense of direction is terrible because my ability to picture it. People say like it was by that tree. I didn't see the tree. I see in words. That's why I write books for a living. But some people are hyper visual, like the way I'm hyper auditory.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the pattern is
Mm.
different, but we all
Right.
have a lack of synaptical pruning that shows up in different patterns, which means we are taking in more data. I don't know if you've ever had somebody like that you worked with who complained about something like, I don't know, a buzzing fluorescent light. And I'm not saying that person was necessarily autistic, but I think
Right.
one of the things that we often think, if that buzzing light, you didn't even notice it and you didn't bother you, we often
Mm.
think, wow, that lady's a pain in the ass for complaining about the,
Hmm.
like, what an annoying lady. Because we're imagining she hears the buzzing light the way we hear the buzzing light, which is like
Hmm.
not
Mhm.
that big of a deal. So why are you being a jerk?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what we don't realize is because of these different and by the way, it is neurodiversity. So everybody's synaptical pruning pattern is different. What
Mhm.
makes you autistic is that it is debilitating to the point where it can be a disability because that buzzing light literally is giving you a headache, is making it impossible for you to work, is making you anxious, is
Yeah.
giving you depression, is like literally making you want to leave the planet. And
Hmm.
so the stigma that we are difficult, the reason we get fired from everything, work, relationships, etc., it's like this stigma that we're difficult. And if we just all had more awareness, like, hey, everyone's got different senses,
Exactly. Exactly.
everyone does,
Yeah.
it makes the world
Right.
better for everyone, not just autistic people.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a major win to be like, oh, what do you hear when you hear that light? That is
Yeah. Yeah.
barely even notice it. Tell me what's happening for you.
Well, and you had
Yeah.
mentioned masking and that you had to learn how to mask it, but it's exhausting. And if you could just expand on like what is that exactly, like masking?
Yeah.
What?
Well, most autistic people get told, like, you're a big jerk. Why are you making a big deal about the buzzing light? And after a few times, it happened when you were 12 at Girl Scout camp, and then it happened when you were 16 on a school field trip or whatever. After enough times, you realize to start to deny your own thoughts about things. You start gaslighting yourself about everything. And so you're like, well, don't say anything because that's just going to cause problems. here as we're talking, and that's to help
Mhm.
my emotional regulation. But we would know it was weird to like rock or move or play with a bubble popper or something like that. So we just don't do it. So instead we're like this. We're like, okay, let me act normal. How's Benef acting right now? Let me act like that. And do it all day long. And that is like, just imagine squeezing your ass cheeks all day long.
That's
Like,
exhausting.
It's
Yeah.
just really
Absolutely
exhausting.
exhausting.
So then you hit this breaking point where someone will say something to you like, can you pass the ketchup? And you lose your mind on them, and then your relationship falls apart. So we're often not even very good at it, although women tend to be much better than men, and people of color tend to be much better than white people, because it is what keeps you safe. So being very good at masking becomes a survival skill. So I mentioned I
Okay.
wasn't very good at it. There's a couple of reasons. One of them just has to do with my particular brain and the support needs that I had, but a lot of it has to do with privilege.
Yeah.
One of the reasons
Yeah.
why we think of autistic people as little white boys, they're not just little white boys. They are specifically little white rich boys. And there is a specific reason for that, which is they didn't have to mask. Little rich white boys are seen as valuable to society. And so they were allowed to stim or have weird relationships with trains or whatever. And their parents, particularly their moms, we call them autism moms, were like, I will get a diagnosis for my child. Whereas like moms of girls or moms of Black kids were like, shut up and act right. And so they learned to mask to stay alive. The reason why we are able to diagnose better is we can now see what masking looks like. We have some better tools for that. But also, in some ways, there's ways that the world is getting worse. But in some ways, the world is getting more egalitarian. And those of us who are from marginalized communities are like, whoa, 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 hold on, that's me too. Like, I'm not going to just mask for the rest of my life. And we're just, mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore.
The other thing that us NTs do that I guess is weird is like, we're always asking like, how are you? Which I asked you immediately without even thinking. Like, I was like, damn it, I just asked that question, which is everybody hates.
And you said you weren't going to do that. You actually pointed that out.
Like the one thing
but
not
you know
to do
what?
is ask Angela, how are you?
But I feel like but don't you feel like that's part of that cultural and unaware portion of things?
It's a part of the NT culture. We ask that, and we expect people to be
because
like,
we expect people
I'm
to,
doing great. Unless you really know them and want to tell them how you actually are doing. The answer is, I'm fine. Like,
because people here don't even like that.
You could pick up the cues of like when you're supposed to give the real answer and when you're supposed to give.
You're supposed to give the wrong
answer is. Like, I have been told the fake answer. I understand the fake. Fine, how are you? I understand it. Whenever I'm asked, how are you? I have a whole interior monologue where I'm like, no matter what, answer how fine, how are you? That's going to be a good answer. But people don't just say, how are you? They say it like with a way, how are you in England? And now I'm like, fuck, fine, how are you? That's the wrong answer. Okay, right now, how am I? Let me check in. I guess I'm good. How's my relationship going? Gained weight. Should I talk about that? I'm feeling fresh. And then I have this whole thing. And then I'm like, it's too much. I can't with the, and if
that's definitely interesting to hear that.
Well, then I must get tested because I go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Because and living here in Europe, anytime someone asks the question, they hate when American asks that question, first of all.
How are
because
you? They do.
We always say, how are you? And they know that we're fake when we're saying that. Right. And
it's like them, a greeting. It's just like, hello.
I know that, but for them, if you're asking me, but if you're asking me, how are you? Then they thinking that, oh, you want to know my whole day or my whole, okay, really I woke up, I did this, I did that. Yeah. So I'm like, no.
Actually, what's a technique that we teach is to have a more specific opener. For instance, if you were going to take a fictional character to dinner, who would it be?
Mm-hmm.
That's a much better question for an autistic person than how are you?
Well, Angela, you have a whole TikTok series on, traveling, that traveling, as you said, mentioned before that you travel solo. Can you help us with some tips on certain things that, that autistic folks can to look for, and those who aren't, what can we look for, in a group setting when we
Yeah.
travel?
Well, I think the orientation that changed for me, because I do want to see things. I'm going to, in that case, it was Italy. Like, I'm going to Italy. I want to see things. But what I prioritized, and I would say this for Italy or Disney or anywhere, is prioritizing emotional regulation. And the reason why I prioritize, so I might see less. It's very possible I will see less, but it's also the goal, especially with group travel, is to not blow things up and for everyone to reminisce about that trip as the time where I embarrassed myself.
Mhm.
And so I know if I'm emotionally dysregulated, which is like it's easier at home for me to stay regulated because I have all my stuff. I have my blanket, I have my pillow, I have my brand of tea, I have like all my things. And so when you're traveling, you are much more likely to become dysregulated. When you're dysregulated, you are much more likely to have a meltdown or a shutdown. And on that trip, I guess I'll start backwards before I give you some tips I'll tell you at the time on that trip when I got dysregulated, we went to this winery, vineyard tour in Tuscany. What could be better? I was very excited about this.
Jealous already.
Lovely. And it was a beautiful tour. And then something went wrong with the dinner, and there was not direct communication, which is one of the things that I require. And between the time we ordered and when we got served, it was like an hour. And when we got there, I was hungry. I think we got there at 7. And then we did this whole tour. And then it was like 9 and we still hadn't eaten. And I was progressively just like, I'm just getting hangry, right? This is not autism specific, but the part that was like an autistic issue is everyone in the group decided, which makes sense, we're in Tuscany at a vineyard, there's nothing to complain about. All I could think of was like, why is nobody else mad? And why is nobody else doing anything? And then when I would ask things, I kept getting like shut down, like, they're going to come out sometime, have another glass of wine. And then I was like, I think they're trying to get us to buy more wine. Like, I think this is their marketing strategy. So I was doing like bottom up processing. And I was like Sherlock Holmes, also autistic, trying to like solve the mysteries of this vineyard. And I was doing like research on my phone and writing letters like a lawyer and gathering facts and data. And I progressively got more and more dysregulated. And then I was moving towards a meltdown. And I was like, okay, I got to get away from everybody. So I ended up going into the bathroom, which is the safe place for all autistic people. And I like sat in the bathroom for an hour, which was, of course, when the food came out.
Oh, no.
I still didn't get food. And I sort of ruined the night for myself, but also everyone else was like, what's wrong with Angela? Is Angela okay? Why is Angela freaking out? So what I should have done, playing that back, is I should have prioritized my emotional regulation. I should have brought snacks. I was like, oh, I don't want to ruin the vineyard food. I don't want to ruin this. And I was not prepared with the level of self-care I needed not to have just a meltdown or very close to a shutdown. I think there are videos of me crying in a booth. But I will say, what do you need for emotional regulation? And pack that first. So one of the things I always pack is my pillow and my blanket. That is inefficient packing. But I know if I end up with the wrong pillow or the wrong blanket, or I'm too cold or too hot, I'm going to end up having a tantrum like that more often and more likely. The other thing that has become really important to me is really focusing on packing comfortable clothes.
Mm.
So like a lot of times when you think about a trip, you're like, oh, I want these pictures in Tuscany with this outfit or whatever. So you can pose for the photos, but make sure that you have like consistently clothes that are going to be comfortable, not just that they fit you or that they're pretty or that you want to wear them or you're dressing like your friends that are going. And really being your own first self advocate. So
Mhm.
for me, I said hearing is one of my big issues. So I always have loop engage earphones. They're earplugs where you can still hear people talking. So if I go to a museum or we went to a shopping mall, I always have those. And I also advocate for myself that I'm going to take breaks, but I set it up as an expectation. I knew I was going to need a break. So I scoped that out in advance where I could take a break, how I would take a break, when I could take a break, having actual schedules and structure. And then I let everyone know ahead of time I was going to do that. If I didn't do that, what would have happened is I would have ended up sensory overloaded and melting down later. So that self-awareness, by the way, these are tips for autistic people, but I don't see how this doesn't help everyone.
Right. No,
I was just going to say, like, I need to do that.
I wrote that down. Prioritize emotional regulation when traveling because, I need that too. Like, I'll exhaust myself doing stupid
I think
shit.
Disney is the worst for that. I've never seen more unhappy people. You take your toddlers for 10 hours to somewhere to stand in line, often with heat and bugs. That's the plan. That is not a good setup.
No,
like,
that's horrible. And they won't remember it. Toddlers.
When you're in a group setting, or if you're around or about with other people, do you let them be aware that you're autistic? And then are you afraid because you let folks know that they're now going to treat you differently when you don't want to be treated differently, but you want them to be understanding and aware? And then the second part is, what can we do, neurotypical people, to be more aware or compassionate with autistic travel?
Yeah,
So,
I love that
because I'm curious
That's such
to
a great
know how that
question.
is.
So first thing is when you disclose, you sign up to be an autism educator.
Okay.
And I think Black people go through this where like just because you're Black, you suddenly have to like educate us on everything. Like, but when you're autistic and when you're particularly me, everybody's different, where I could disclose or I could not disclose. I have this choice that like you don't get when you're Black.
Right.
Like
it's even worse when you're a person of color. That's why I asked the question, because sometimes people portray that to be you're dumb or you're ignorant or this and that. So I'm glad you brought that up because that's important.
Yeah. So I think what I do and what I advocate for people is you have to be selective about when and where you disclose. And there are times where disclosing is not helpful or good, and it's very hard to tell. Often in work settings, you will be discriminated against and they will find a way to fire you.
Yes.
So now if you need accommodations or if you're applying for disability or going through burnout, it is protected by the ADA in America. It's even more protected in England. They have the Autism Act of 2009. You can't be fired for it, but they will find a way.
Yes.
People are creative if they.
Yes, that is true.
So Megan Joe is a neurotypical friend of mine who I never knew the answer to your question. Like, what can we do as neurotypicals? She does it so perfectly. It's so easy. And it's my favorite thing to tell people, which is ask questions about me. If you see me do something weird that seems weird to you, like ask too many questions about how long the food is taking. So a lot of it's we're bottom up processors. So we ask a lot of questions. If you see me like leave a room and walk away, what most neurotypicals want to do is they want to fix it. So they're like, are you okay? How come you left? And question that would be more helpful to me is like, what's going on? What did you just experience? Tell me what experience you're having. Explain this. We are often thought of as being liars, or the little boy who cried wolf, or Cassandras. We're all called Cassandra. The Emperor's New Clothes. It's another Hans Andersen book, and that is in a very typical autistic. We're like, hello, he's naked? Anyone? Naked. So, Megan just always, whenever I do something, instead of jumping to being like defensive or mad at me, for whatever reason, her initial reaction is, I must ask more questions. Yeah, don't make
that's
just ask questions.
Yeah.
I have good intent. The assumption is usually I'm trying to manipulate you or get something. And like, I swear I'm not. I'm just trying to understand. I just need more information, whatever.
And I'll be honest, I would know. So I think a light bulb went off in my head when you said the way to ask a question. Because it's natural for us, for everyone, if you see somebody just walk off just because or whatever, is to just say, hey, what's up? Why'd you walk off?
Yeah.
Well, I personally wouldn't have done that because I'm a New Yorker, and I'd be like, why in the fuck you walk off? Like, the fuck? Angrily, but I'm not angry. But that's what I would say. You would be pissed if I did that. Probably.
Like this New Yorker, I would just tell you 2 dirty words and then walk away.
Yeah, I'd be like, why the fuck you walk away? That's rude. But I did not know about your situation. I think.
I'm going to give another travel example I think will be helpful. I went to Aruba a few months ago, and there's a place in Aruba where you I don't know if it's jumping in a blowhole or something, but it's like some sort of cliff jumping that everyone does. It's like one tourist stops where you jump off a cliff into some sort of very blue and beautiful water. And anyone who is autistic, who is proprioceptive, they might enjoy that stuff, but I am very proprioceptive avoidant and hate things like that. And this was the first time that I knew in advance I wasn't going to do it. So usually before something like that, I'm super nervous. There's always someone in the group who's super nervous, right? And then everyone will cheer them on. Like, you got this, Ange, you can do this. Be brave. You got this. And that's the part that makes me want to die. Now I feel like I'm going to let everyone else down if I don't jump, but also I'm taking so much time, but I'm in this, I'm spinning because I don't want to do it, but maybe I should. They're going to be you're going to be so happy when you do it. Think of how good it's going to feel when you did it.
False motivation.
Think of how it's going to feel. Think of how it's going to feel. Think of how I'm not getting anything from that. So then I'm slowing everything down and I'm in this anxiety loop. So anything that is adventurous with travel when you're in a group, and again, not everybody's diagnosed. Most autistic people are not diagnosed. So one of my travel tips for everyone to make the world more neuroaffirming is, does somebody want to be encouraged to jump or walk the tightrope or whatever? Will they be happy when it's finished? I think more encouraging ways to approach that are just do it or don't do it. You are here. Or do you want me to cheer you on? Does that motivate you? Or do you want some space?
So it just really seems that the going theme is then, when dealing with someone who is autistic, or better I should say, for those who have not, or you may not be sure about, the best thing to do is to ask qualifying questions. And I think that goes for anybody, whether you're trying to get to know someone,
for everyone,
or you're in a situation that you're not too sure of, is ask questions and be patient, honestly.
And believe people.
Yes. Huge.
Yeah.
Well, this has just been fantastic, Angela. I really, really do appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
I know we're a little bit longer on this, but
I was going to say, can I give you one more tip?
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So my favorite thing about this tip is that it's new research. So this is research from a guy named Damian Milton at the University of Kent from 2012. I mentioned to you guys before we started recording that I'm doing a PhD. It is with Damian Milton. Okay, Damian Milton has an autistic kid. One of the things that we were all told, I was told when I got my diagnosis, is autistic people lack empathy. It often appears like we lack empathy. There's a lot of evidence. It's all based on this theory of mind. Simon Baron Cohen did a bunch of stuff. It's all BS. It was Sacha Baron Cohen's brother. So he designs this study. He gets together 3 groups of people. One group of all neurotypicals, one group of all autistic people, and one group that is mixed, 50-50 autistic and neurotypical. Something happens in the group. There's a confederate, something happens, and the other person is expected to react. So let's just say they drop their books or something. The neurotypical group finds that the other neurotypical person has empathy. They're like, yes, big marks for empathy. I dropped my books, they picked them up, it all went the way it was supposed to. In the autistic group, the autistic people report, yes, the other autistic person, they didn't know they were autistic. The other person had empathy. I dropped my books and they stood there while I picked them up because they didn't want to interrupt my flow or put the books in the wrong order, which would have been so fucking rude if somebody just picks the books and stacks them wrong. So they're like, they stood there. They asked me questions while I picked up my books. And then in this third group, this mixed group, the autistic people were like, these people are assholes. I dropped my books and they just reorder them. They're upside down. There's backwards. And the neurotypical people are like, these autistic people are fucking assholes. They have no empathy. I dropped my books and they didn't even pick them up. So this paper is called the double empathy problem. This is research, Damian Milton's classic and so important double empathy problem, where he found autistic people have empathy. We have just as much empathy. Our empathy just looks different than your empathy.
Yeah.
You are judging it through the gaze of a neurotypical lens. You're like, this is what empathy looks like. But we have in our culture a way that we do empathy that works for us. And if you are alive, you know at least one autistic person. So the actual right now are about 3%. My guess is it's closer to 10%. And most of the people that are not diagnosed are women, queer people, and people of color. My advice to you is if there's someone in your life who you think lacks empathy, that's not to say nobody lacks empathy. I would just start digging around. If this is somebody you love, a kid, a parent, a boss, maybe not somebody you love, but somebody you have to deal with, and it just bugs you that they lack total empathy, if you've ever thought that or said that, look into the double empathy research because you might benefit from just learning our culture.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Really good stuff. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you so very much for for again spending this time with us and just just letting us share in this with you and be better prepared. Certainly for out there. So, Dr. Angela, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again for joining us for another episode of Rhythm and Rome. We really appreciate you being here today. So what do you need to do? You need to subscribe. You need to like, comment, and share. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Au revoir.
Thank you. Cheers.